Prophecy Club? Do you think things just take their normal course of action, or do you think that there are people in high places that try to stack the deck to their advantage? Do you think that no one tries to hide a card, or no one is slipping information under the table? Or do you believe that there really is a group of people in high places that work together around the globe to do evil things? In other words, do you believe that history just happens the way it happens, or do you think that there are some people behind the curtain that push the buttons and pull the strings to their advantage? If there is a group of people that can and do rule the world, who are they? What is their name? When were they formed? And how do we know for certain that this is all true? To answer that question, I invited Dr. Stan Monteith to come in and make an awesome DVD. People love this DVD. It's called Secrets of the Illuminati. He spent 37 years studying the Illuminati. He tells you all about the history of this conspiracy, including the Federal Reserve, Rhodes Scholar, the Jesuits, Lucius Trust, the Masons, Skull and Bones, the Rosicrucians, the Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations, Bilderbergers, and a whole lot more. Now let's go listen to the audio from the DVD Secrets of the Illuminati by Dr. Stan Monteith.
One of my favorite books is written by Thomas Jefferson. It's called The Master Thoughts of Thomas Jefferson. The book was actually published in 1909. But it describes something that Thomas Jefferson wrote almost 200 years ago. And among his thoughts are these. Everything predicted by the enemies of banks at the beginning is now coming to pass. We are to be ruined now by a deluge of bank paper as we were formerly by the old Continental paper. It is cruel that such revolutions and private fortunes should be at the mercy of avarice adventurers who, instead of employing their capital, if any they have, in manufacture, commerce, and other useful pursuits, make it an instrument to burden all the interchanges of property with their swindling profits which are the price of no useful industry of theirs. Prudent men must be on their guard in this game of robins alive and take care that the spark does not extinguish in their hands. I am an enemy to all bank discounting bills or notes for anything but coin, but our whole country is so fascinated by this jack-o'-lantern of wealth that they'll not stop short of its total and fatal explosion. And of course, today we see the stock market progressively going up, and many, many people think it's going to keep going up forever. But I've got news for you. Time and time again, through the decades and through the centuries, we've seen exactly the same thing happen that will happen very soon to America. Now, this is a copy of the Congressional Record of February of 1917. I happen to come from a town called Santa Cruz in California. And we have a university there. We have such people as Bettina Aptheker. She's a professor there, formerly a member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party. Her father, Herbert Aptheker, was the chief theoretician of the Communist Party, and she herself had organized the free speech movement in Berkeley in 1964. We have Angela Davis there. We even gave a Ph.D. to Huey Newton, the leader of the Black Panthers, shortly before he died in a drug deal. But the advantage of having a university in your community is that you can get the books and you can get the congressional records there that are readily available, are not available to most people. So this is taken from the Congressional Record of February of 1917, which we got at our university library. Congressman Callaway is writing about what is going on in America in February of 1917, just 2 months before we enter the war in Europe. Let's go to the second paragraph. In March of 1915, the J.P. Morgan interests, now those are the banking interests. J.P. Morgan is the most powerful banker in America in 1915. So in March of 1915, the J.P. Morgan interest, the steel building, the powder interest, and their subsidiary organizations got together 12 men high up in the newspaper world and employed them to select the most influential newspapers in the United States and sufficient numbers of them to control generally the policy of the daily press of the United States. These 12 men worked the problem out by selecting 179 newspapers and then began by an elimination process to retain only those necessary for the purpose of controlling the general policy of the daily press throughout the country. They found it was only necessary to purchase the control of 25 of the greatest papers. The 25 papers were agreed upon. Emissaries were sent to purchase the policy, national and international, of these papers. An agreement was reached. The policy of the papers was bought to be paid for by the month. An editor was furnished for each paper to properly supervise and edit information regarding the question of preparedness, militarism, financial policies, and other things of national and international nature considered vital to the interests of the purchasers. The contract is in existence at the present time, and it accounts for the news columns of the daily press of the country, focusing on military matters and military preparedness. Now, 2 months later, we went into the war. How did they get the American people to go to war in 1917, in a war that had no relationship to the United States? Well, they did it with atrocity stories, of course. And you control the press, and they wrote stories about how the Belgian women were being raped and ravaged by the Belgian soldiers, how the Belgian women had their breasts cut off, and how the German soldiers were cutting off the hands of little Belgian boys. And day after day after day after day after day, you read the atrocity stories, and an awful lot of Americans honestly believed this. Now, I talked many years later to a gentleman who had volunteered for service to go with the American Expeditionary Force to Europe to fight those terrible Germans who were committing these horrible atrocities. And, of course, by the time he reached Belgium, most of his friends were dead. And he got there, and there were no little boys with their hands cut off. There were no women who had been raped. It was all a lie. But a lie told convincingly enough and often enough is believed. And J.P. Morgan and their control of the media convinced the entire American public that a lie was truth. Many times there are atrocities, and we just never hear about them. Most of you may very well remember when we were going into Desert Storm, because, of course, the Iraqis had moved into Kuwait, and the stories about those wicked Iraqi soldiers who went into the hospital in Kuwait City and took the little babies out of their bassinets and threw them on the ground and bayoneted them. I don't know how many of you remember those stories, but this was in the press at that time. There wasn't any truth to it. But they made it up. It became the reality of the American people, and it somehow justified our getting involved in Desert Storm. One of the other interesting things that we find about bankers is that a letter I found in Colonel House's papers when I went back to Yale University in 1980. And Colonel House's papers are at Yale University. Now, Colonel Edward Mandell House is one of the most important individuals of the 20th century, probably the single most important American of the 20th century. And you'll learn a lot more about him as we progress through the evening. But this letter was written by Franklin Delano Roosevelt on White House stationery to Colonel House. And on the second page, written in November of 1933, President Roosevelt wrote, "I had a nice talk with Jack Morgan the other day." Now, that's the son of J.P. Morgan. He's now dead. And then he goes on to say, "The real truth of the matter is, as you and I know, that a financial element in the larger centers has owned the government ever since the days of Andrew Jackson, and I'm not wholly accepting the administration of W.W." That's Woodrow Wilson. So the president is writing to Colonel House saying the bankers have controlled America for going back to Andrew Jackson. That would be about 1832 when Andrew Jackson came into the presidency, and this was written in November of 1933. This little book, Secrets Revealed, written by Dr. Dennis Cuddy, who I feel is the finest researcher we have in the United States on these matters. And here he takes references to articles both in the New York Times and in the Washington Times, and he comments from an article on August 5th, 1995 in the New York Times, and he simply quotes them, "In a small Swiss city sits an international organization so obscure and secretive, control of the institution, the Bank for International Settlement, lies with some of the world's most famous and least visible men. The heads of 32 central banks, officials able to shift billions of dollars and alter the course of economies at the stroke of a pen." On June 28, 1998, the Washington Post published an article about the Bank for International Settlement titled, "At Secret Meetings in Switzerland, 13 People Shaped the World's Economy," which described these individuals as this economic cabal, this secretive group, the financial barons who control the world's money supply. And there is a great deal of evidence to suggest that the force behind everything going on in the world today is indeed the bankers. But there are other people who say, no, it's not really the bankers. The real force behind what's going on in the world today is an organization known as the Council on Foreign Relations. Because you see, most of the leading bankers of the United States just happen to belong to the Council on Foreign Relations, but here the industrialists belong as well, and the people who control so much of our government. In fact, since 1953, all but one Secretary of State have come from the Council on Foreign Relations. All but one Deputy Secretary of State have come from the CFR. All but one Director of the CIA, and every Chairman of the Federal Reserve System, and 6 of our last 9 presidents. Certainly it must be the Council on Foreign Relations. That is the center of everything going on in the world today. In 1979, no less a person than Barry Goldwater, in his book With No Apologies, commented on this fact, and he noted that when we change presidents, it is understood to mean that voters are ordering a change in national policy. Since 1945, 3 different Republicans have occupied the White House for a period of 16 years. 4 Democrats have held this most powerful post the world has to offer for a period of 17 years. With the exception of the first 7 years of the Eisenhower administration, there's been no appreciable change in foreign or domestic policy direction. When a new president comes on board, there's a great turnover in personnel, but no change in policy. An example, during the Nixon years, Henry Kissinger, CFR member and Nelson Rockefeller's protege, was in charge of foreign policy. When Jimmy Carter was elected, Kissinger was replaced by Zbigniew Brzezinski, CFR member and David Rockefeller's protege. Now, you would think if a person of Barry Goldwater's stature wrote about such things that everybody would hear about it. But amazingly enough, these things are seldom, if ever, quoted.
We'll be right back after this message. The April gift offer is a double DVD set. First, in Genesis Secrets and the End Times, C.K. Quarterman covers what Elohim will do next. Ancient high technology, firmament and the sea of glass, sons of God and the Nephilim, Noah's genetic code, stargates, and the Tower of Babel. Then, in Fallen Angels, Giants, UFOs, and Prophecy, his topics are End Times and Noah, Gap Creationism, Sons of God Mating Today, Giants, again, Unseen Elite Controllers, Genetics of the Antichrist, Origins of Demons, UFOs, Genesis to Revelation, and the New World Order Plan. It's a double DVD package valued at $60 for a gift of just $45 at prophecyclub.com. Just spell prophecy with a C. It's the April gift offer at prophecyclub.com. The February gift offer is Angels at Work. Prophet Leslie tells of many examples in her life in which the Lord set forth his angels to bring back lost items, keep her loved ones out of harm's way, and comforted her in difficult times and directed her footsteps. You will learn how to call on ministering spirits in time of need. Be uplifted, encouraged, and build your faith. In True or False Prophecies, also by Prophet Leslie, she helps you to recognize the lies and false information that can lead you away from the truth. Topics are: recognize a true or false prophecy or prophet, receive the best blessings, receive a double blessing, recognize the anointing for the spirit of prophecy. Then, Will You Survive America's Fall by Doug Metzger is talking about how he had a very radical salvation and God began to immediately give him visions. He shares 16 visions of America's future, and he was shown how unspeakable torment is coming to America to turn us back to God. Topics are: America the Fallen Tree, vision of how the church was formed, vision of a nuclear missile, 12 cities destroyed, 1 million voices screaming, 2 explosions, 10-to-1 inflation, dollar becomes worthless, the begging woman and the turnstile, the great betrayal, only prayer is protection, and the greatest horror and revival at the same time. Angels at Work, $20. True or False Prophecies, $30. Will You Survive America's Fall, $30. 3 DVDs valued at $80 for a gift of just $45. It's the February gift offer, available at prophecyclub.com or calling 785-266-1112. And now, back to the program.
But amazingly enough, these things are seldom, if ever, quoted, even by many of our so-called conservative leaders. Now, there are other people who will tell you, well, this is all well and true, but the real force in the world is not the Council on Foreign Relations, it is the Bilderbergers. And of course, the Bilderbergers are made up not only of the leaders of the United States, but the leaders of Europe as well. And you'll find in the Bilderbergers why the leading bankers of Europe, the leading socialists of Europe, the leading capitalists of Europe. Strange to find the capitalists and socialists working together in an organization. Many of the leaders of the various political parties, the people who are about to become president or about to become prime minister. In fact, it is said that Bill Clinton was actually selected at a Bilderberger meeting back in 1991 and 1992. He was selected to replace George Bush. Now, it is not coincidence that both George Bush and Bill Clinton, who ran for the presidency, one a Republican, one a Democrat in 1992, both of them belonged to the CFR at one time, the Bilderbergers and the Trilateral Commission. Well, Phyllis Schlafly wrote a book in 1964. It's called A Choice, Not an Echo. And in that book, she said this. Several years ago, the author of this book stumbled on a clear evidence of that very powerful men actually do meet to make plans which are kept secret from American citizens. While visiting at Sea Island, Georgia, this writer discovered the details of a secret meeting on nearby St. Simon's Island, Georgia, held at the King and Princess Hotel, February of 1957. The most elaborate precautions were taken to prevent Americans from knowing who attended this secret meeting or what transpired there. And then she goes on to say, the participants at the St. Simon's meeting were some of the biggest names in American politics, business, and the press. As described by an eyewitness observer at that meeting, those who came were not the heads of state. They were those who gave orders to the heads of state. In other words, the kingmakers. Well, there are others who say, well, that's all very well and good. But it's really not the Bilderbergers. It's an organization known as the Trilateral Commission, because the Trilateral Commission is actually made up not only of the leaders of Europe and the United States, it's also made up of the leaders of Asia as well. In fact, Barry Goldwater, on page 280 of his book, With No Apologies, basically said this. He's talking about the implications of Governor Rockefeller's presentation have become concrete proposals advanced by David Rockefeller's newest international cabal. A cabal is sort of a secret organization of the Trilateral Commission. Whereas the Council on Foreign Relations is distinctly national in membership, the Trilateral Commission is international. Representation is allocated equally to Western Europe, Japan, and the United States. It is intended to be the vehicle for multinational consolidation of commercial and banking interests by seizing control of the political government of the United States. Let me read what Barry Goldwater said again. It is intended to be the vehicle for multinational consolidation of the commercial and banking interests. In other words, all throughout the world, they're going to seize banking and commercial interests, but they're going to do it by seizing control of the political government of the United States. Well, that's a pretty strong statement. You would think that people would be talking about that. Anybody wanted to seize control of this political government of the United States, that suggests they really want a dictatorship, or maybe they already have a dictatorship. Well, there are others who are going to say it's really not this organization you're talking about. It's really something called the Club of Rome. And you can actually pull this logo down off the internet site where we got it. And what I'm about to show you comes from the Club of Rome's internet site on the web. And basically, their statement is that their purpose is to act as an international, non-official catalyst of change. Now, this is taken from their website below. Another new development was the decision to invite prominent world figures who share the club's concern to become honorary members, although their positions may prevent them from taking a public stance, as in the case of the Queen of the Netherlands or the King and Queen of Spain. They can and do give valued moral support. Among the others are former President Gorbachev, former President Richard von Weizsäcker of Germany, the first president of newly democratic Czechoslovakia, Václav Havel, the president of Hungary, the president of Argentina, etc., etc. Here, some of the most wealthy and powerful men in the world meet to plan the future. Among the leaders of the Club of Rome is a man named Maurice Strong. Now, those of you who have studied this will well recognize that Maurice Strong is one of the most powerful men in the world, but he's always working within the shadows. A man who never graduated from high school, and yet by the time he was 21 had a very important position in international finance. By the time he was 31, he headed one of the large financial corporations and financial advisory companies, a multi-billionaire, the man who is today the senior advisor to Kofi Annan, the Secretary General of the United Nations. Now, you probably believe Kofi Annan is the Secretary General and leads the United Nations, but he is simply a figurehead for the man who really runs the UN. His name is Maurice Strong, a member of the Club of Rome. And Maurice Strong, of course, it was the first Secretary General of the First Earth Summit in 1972, the second Secretary General of the Earth Summit in 1992, and the Secretary General of the Third Earth Summit in 1997. He has, of course, put out the Global Biodiversity Assessment Report, which really calls for the total disruption of Western civilization. He's been quoted as saying the only way to save the Earth is to destroy Western civilization. He has a little farm in Colorado. It's called Baca. About 100,000 acres there, where occultists from all over the world meet. They have witches, they have medicine men, they have shamans, they have Satanists, they have Shirley MacLaine. According to an article in West Magazine, why men like Henry Kissinger and Robert McNamara, remember the man who sent our boys to Vietnam to fight for 10 years but never allowed to win. They're not infrequent visitors at Baca. Maurice Strong's wife happens to be a witch, and she prays the sun up every morning. A strange situation that this man, as a great capitalist, is working so closely with Mikhail Gorbachev. In fact, the two of them are writing something known as the Earth Charter, a plan for the world and for your future. And you might wonder why the former head of the Soviet KGB, the former dictator of Russia, is working with a capitalist to reshape the world. And yet, of course, the more you study this, you begin to find there may be very little difference between the leaders of the communist nations and the leaders of the capitalist nations. Well, there are other people who will tell you that you really are mistaken. It's really not a capitalist conspiracy at all. It is a communist conspiracy. And this book, The Masters of Deceit, written by J. Edgar Hoover about 1960, gives an excellent overview of what communism is all about. And of course, at that time, communism controlled about a third of the world's population, a quarter of the world's landmass. And J. Edgar Hoover quotes Khrushchev at that time. In June of 1957, Nikita Khrushchev, the Soviet Communist Party boss, was interviewed before a nationwide American television audience, and with calm assurance he stated, "I can prophesy that your grandchildren in America will live under socialism. And please don't be afraid of that. Your children will not understand how their grandparents did not understand the progressive nature of a socialist society." Now, isn't it interesting that Khrushchev would say your grandchildren will live under socialism, not under communism? But you have to understand that every communist works for socialism. There is no communism in Russia. There never was any communism in Russia, because communism is when the state withers away, and the state never withers away. What the state does is always gain more power, like a hungry lion, always more power over the lives of the people. Now, perhaps to better understand what we're speaking about, I'd like to tell you about a book called New Lies for Old. Many of you, if you listen to Barbara Walters, Tom Brokaw, or Dan Rather, may have heard that there is no longer any communism in the world, that we won the Cold War. Communism is dead. And if that indeed is true, then why do 1.2 billion people live in communist China? And there's communism in North Korea, there's communism in Vietnam, there's communism in Cuba. In fact, I used to live in Africa, as I mentioned earlier, and the communists there control Rhodesia under Mugabe. They dominate South Africa, and if Nelson Mandela is not a communist, he'll do to one comes along. I've seen him with his raised clenched fist in front of the communist flag. He surrounded himself by communists. The man slated to replace him, indeed, as a communist. Southwest Africa is controlled by a dictator named Neto. Angola is controlled by the communists. And we've recently brought Cabal to power in Zaire. And Cabal is a communist. So what's wrong with this idea that communism is dead, or maybe it is all a myth? Well, let me tell you a little bit about this book. It was written by Anatoly Golitsyn, who was a major in Soviet planning. And he defected to the United States and tried to tell American intelligence that the communists had a long-range plan to convince the American people that they had won the battle. And, of course, as he was debriefed by the CIA, any CIA official who believed him was immediately fired. And there was a group under James Angleton who were just put out of the CIA or retired. Everybody who stayed in the CIA went along with the official party line that communism was eventually going to be defeated, and we were going to defeat it. The evil empire was going to be destroyed. This book was written in 1984, and in this, Golitsyn says very clearly that what is going to happen is the fact that the Soviets are going to try to convince you that you've won the Cold War, that their government's going to fall, that they're going to become more democratic. They are going to tear down the Berlin Wall, which is what they did. We didn't tear down the Berlin Wall. They tore it down. That Solidarity is going to take control in Poland, and, of course, they're going to convince you to go ahead and unilaterally disarm, and you'll give them more and more and more money so they can build themselves up in preparation for the inevitable war that they believe is coming. Another article that comes out of the New York Times in March of 1963, IMF relents on aid to Russia, but U.S. talks tougher. Now, you have to understand, we're financing Russia today. We keep pouring billions and billions of dollars in. They've recently defaulted on $100 billion. And what are we doing? Well, we're giving them more money. And there's something wrong with this picture. But if you go back through history, you will find, as we'll discuss later, that we have financed Russia directly or indirectly since the time of the Russian Revolution back in 1917, because communism or socialism doesn't work. It's always had to have help from the West. This is a fax I get regularly from J. Michael Waller. The headline here, IMF promises more money as Russia threatens to arm Serbia. Where do you think that the Serbians get their MiG fighters and their anti-aircraft batteries? And where do you think that they get the wherewithal to withstand the intense bombing that the Americans have brought against them? Now, of course, they get their backing from Russia, and where does Russia get its backing? Well, they get their backing from us.
Time has run out, but I want to say thank you for listening, and thank you for your prayers and your gifts of support. God bless. Now from the Prophecy Club, some exciting opportunities for you. The April gift offer is a double DVD set. First, in Genesis Secrets and the End Times, C.K. Quarterman covers what Elohim will do next. Ancient high technology, firmament and the sea of glass, sons of God and the Nephilim, Noah's genetic code, stargates, and the Tower of Babel. Then, in Fallen Angels, Giants, UFOs, and Prophecy, his topics are End Times and Noah, Gap Creationism, Sons of God Mating Today, Giants again, Unseen Elite Controllers, Genetics of the Antichrist, Origins of Demons, UFOs, Genesis to Revelation, and the New World Order Plan. It's a double DVD package valued at $60 for a gift of just $45 at prophecyclub.com. Just spell prophecy with a C. It's the April gift offer at prophecyclub.com. God is speaking to Augusto Perez with angel visits audibly and has given him 44 dreams and visions, showing him some amazing things about the future of America and the world. In End of Times, his topics are the Great Shaking, the coming famine, the double portion outpouring, the coming attack on the U.S., the Great Darkness, the super devaluation of the dollar, and how God will protect his own. In 1991, Leslie and I went on a 2-week archaeological tour with Ron Wyatt. We walked all over Noah's Ark, brought back a piece of it, and we made it into a new DVD called Noah's Ark Confirms the Bible. Topics are, what is gopher wood, pictures of Noah's Ark, the core drill, the lab test, radar scans, Turkey recognizes this Noah's Ark, Drogue anchor stones, Noah's Ark Confirms the Bible, $20, DVD End of Times gift of $30, get both for a gift of just $35. You want to order the January gift offer, go online to prophecyclub.com or call 785-266-1112.